Okay, let's get to a stamp-along video. I really enjoy doing this style of video. In addition to, I don't know, some of the more experimental, maybe somewhat complex-looking types of scenes, I like getting back to the basics as well. It's fun taking people kind of new to Stampscape stamps and kind of teaching them what it's all about in terms of the usages of the stamps. One of the things I'm going to do here now is I'm going to be working on a matte piece of paper. Okay, it's a 1/4 page card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. All right, and what I have is the Rocky Peaks Large, or just Rocky Peaks, Lakeside Cove Large, and we have the ledge here, and then we'll put some kind of foreground in here. I'll probably just use the Reed stamp. These are some really basic scene building stamps. They're in a lot of different sets out there. Well, not a lot of different sets, but they're in some of the basic sets, nature sets that we have. And they're good kind of overall, kind of general foundational landscaping stamps. That's the way I see those ones. But one of the things that we're going to do in this stamp along is we'll play around a little bit with masks and masking, okay? Now, I rarely do this in my stamping. I don't find the need for masks, 99% of the time, but I thought we'd throw in a little bit of variation because some people do like working with masks. So masks are just a matter of stamping on. I just use some copy paper, and I've cut out masks on these different images right here. There's the Rocky Peaks, okay? And one of the things I did too, okay, I stamped this out twice, all right? And one of them, I just stamped out this whole area right here, okay? And then on the second mask, one of the things I did was I just cut out this portion of it, okay? So one of the things that we can do is we can kind of create a little bit of separation within this given design and I can make this background a little bit darker right here. So instead of this looking like it's all on one plane, I mean, kind of in the image itself, there's some shadows back here, but we can kind of really push this idea of space within a given stamp right here. So that takes it, I don't know, I don't see that as being like an advanced technique or something like that. It's just kind of tweaking things around a little bit. And I've done the same thing for this stamp right here, the ledge, okay? Here's this ledge used in its entirety, okay? And then I have this little bit right here. You can kind of separate anything out of here. You can cut out, a mask for just this little portion right here. It could be this portion. It could be wherever you want it to be, any line in here. So you can kind of create some separation throughout any space. Could be this whole piece right here, and say, this piece right here is kind of closer to you than, I don't know, whatever the masked off space would be, okay? So in this case, I just went to about right here. But here's a little twist here, okay? Here is the piece of paper that I cut out my masks from, okay? Here you can see the top portions of them, where I've taken and I've separated out some space within the image, okay? Here's my mountain, of course, the Rocky Peaks. And there's that portion of the Rocky Peaks right there. All right, now one of the things that we can do, we can kind of play around with this, is let's keep this portion as well, because this will be kind of the negative space, and I'll show you what we'll do with that one in a very simple fashion, okay, when we get to that, at that point in time. And I might use this. What I'll do is I'll use these same images for future stamp-alongs as well, or I'll do a series of, stamp-alongs using that series of images so that you can utilize your masks that you cut out. Those masks, I don't know, it probably took me 1 minute to do 4 different masks, so it's not like a complex task or anything like that. All right, so what we want right now is some sort of black pad. I'm using dye-based ink, and we'll stamp out our composition right now, okay? I like to start off with my largest stamp, but just keep in mind, when you're doing it on this quarter page, I can stamp this a little bit higher, and if I do, I'm not going to have quite as much room for my rocky peaks. So if you want that rocky peaks shown in its entirety, which you don't have to do, I have things running off the top of my page all the time in my scenes, okay? But just keep in mind that, you know, you'll want to stamp this accordingly. So I'm going to go for roughly somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't measure it off if I were you, but just in general, the horizon line kind of represents kind of the midpoint of this design, and just shoot it for somewhere in the mid area of your paper, okay? And again, now I'm doing this on the matte paper right now. Some people are more accustomed to using that than glossy, okay? But if you have your glossy and you're familiar with using that and you want to use that, then go ahead and use your glossy paper. All right, so let's go for the midpoint or so. If you're new to Stampscapes stamps, there's a lot of surface area on a lot of designs, not just in terms of the size, but in terms of surface area. So what you want to do, I like to stand up and use my, you know, leverage and, I don't know, whatever body weight to lean into this, and I usually go left, middle, and right side, okay? Now I don't rock my stamp or something like that. That's what the habit of some people do, kind of early on if you're kind of new to stamping, and that will leave kind of more blobby images because you're getting kind of ink that's inked up on the side of the image printing out, okay? You just want the surface of it, okay? Now, if you're familiar with a lot of these videos that I've done, this should stamp out lighter than stamping on glossy because it's a little bit more absorbent, okay? So you get sometimes, you know, when you do this on matte paper, you get a little bit of variation where it doesn't ink up quite as much, okay? But that's not any big deal. We do a lot of coloring in on these scenes, so nothing to fear or fret about. Now, you know, this is a matte piece of paper. I wouldn't go for, on this lesson at least, I wouldn't go for something like stamping on like a linen paper or something like that, something that has a lot of variation in texture, you know, like a watercolor paper or something of that sort. Okay, let's go for our rocky peaks here, okay? Now I'm going to show you a little technique on this rocky peaks that will make you look like an expert and is super easy to do. About from the bottom to about midway up on your rocky peaks. Now watch this. Don't wipe off everything like hard, okay? See, I'm kind of dabbing on the bottom of this like that. I'm dabbing about 1/4 inch of it off, okay? Taking it off pretty good off the very bottom, but just see this right here, dab off about, I don't know, it's hard to tell how much ink you're taking off, but I'm taking off probably about half of the ink that's been applied to it, okay? So it's going from wet to medium wet to dry. Well, not completely dry on the bottom, but somewhat. And that way, when I stamp it over my trees, hopefully the drier portion stamps out a little bit more gray in terms of value, so that it doesn't obscure my nice silhouette of those tree tops, okay? And I'm just going to put this right over the top of my trees. I don't need to mask anything off. I'm not going down into my rocks, okay? But stamp it somewhere up, you know, up above it. But go right into your trees, and let's see, yeah, I have about 1/4 inch or so of space above my mountain top, that highest peak, from the top of the page. If yours goes off of the page, don't worry about it. Or if you stamp it lower, don't worry about that either, okay? Get plenty of pressure. You can stand if you want to. Okay. So there my mountain is, and it blends right in, but you can see where it's lighter down here, okay? So it's about lighter and about that much space, okay? All right, so we have our composition, I don't know, 2/3 of the main composition at least. Now this is going to represent kind of this land mass on this side of the lake in the form of a ledge. Boulders with lichen is another stamp that would be perfect for this usage, okay? And let's go about right here. Okay. I missed about right here. Sometimes this stamp covers most of that space, so I'll show you. We'll do our first kind of overlapping of the same image here. If you get something like that on the side, just take this side now. I inked up this portion of it, and I'll fill in that little space there. The same can be done if you stamp that mountain left or right a little bit, and if you have a big gap, then just, you know, take whatever side of it and stamp it and fill it in. Okay, so I'm going to overlap this about 1/4 inch, like so. Okay, and we've filled in that area there now. All right. Now, a lot of times in my scenes, if I'm working on glossy cardstock, a lot of times what I like to do is I like to kind of add in my foreground images last. I like to see how my scene kind of fills out, how dark areas get, and then I'll put it in last because I figure if it gets really dark then I might not want so much foreground. In this case, I'm just going to stamp it out right now. Sometimes it makes more sense to people to stamp something out in the beginning so they can see their full composition, and then they treat the scene more like a coloring book. Okay, we have everything down there. Now we know how to fill it in. Okay. But just remember, there's a lot of ways that you can do scenes and finishing off your scenes, okay? Alright, so one of the things that you might notice is I stamped it multiple times and I changed the angle. Let me show you what I did on a blank piece of paper here, okay? So I just went like, for this side, I just kind of went like that, inked it up again, like that. So it's kind of coming from off the page, and then you do the same thing on the other side, okay? Now one of the tricks here too is, watch this. See these little sharp little points right here on my reeds, okay? I put my pressure right in the middle of stamps that have kind of more delicate image parts to it, you know, like birds or ducks or something like that. So adjust your pressure, okay? So I'm stamping it out. Now I have adequate pressure. I don't want to just stamp it, you know, and barely touch it and pull it up, and I didn't, you know, I missed half of the image, but kind of center pressure right in the middle or something like that. And even pressure, and then I come up and I'll get a nice crisp impression. What you don't want to do is you don't want to take something like this, again, and don't rock your stamps. You don't want to take it and then press it like that, and then you get that type of impression. You can even see where I've pressed into that rubber, okay? Oops, sorry. Right up top there. See where there was some ink in those gaps right there? You don't want that. You want it nice and crisp up here, and not smashed up here, okay? So don't rock it or give too much pressure. I mean, that's like an extreme version of it. You know, I put a ton of pressure like that, but nice, light, and even. I mean, it's not hard. Just, you know, it's kind of getting the feel of it, right? See, my finger's just right there. In other words, I mean, it'll come out fine, just as long as you don't rock it like that and come up, you know. All right. We have our basic composition laid out here. Let's see. Now, if you have a little canoeist or something like that, you can put it in there. If you don't want to leave, if you want to leave it blank, go ahead and leave it blank. I'm going to put these paddlers in this one. I haven't used these in a while. Light, even pressure, okay? Adequate pressure, because you want them stamped out. You don't want to kind of just barely like that, and then it's like their whole canoe, you know, is missing or something like that. Unless you're using a stamp positioner, you know, they kind of hit it again. Alright, now, let's just do what we call in art local color, okay? Let's keep this, let's not do this kind of monochromatic thing that I do a lot of times, or, you know, mixing of, you know, tons of different tones or anything like that. Let's keep this one fairly simple, you know, and we'll utilize our masks in this case, okay? And like I said, there are many ways to do these scenes, and there's variations with all media as well. I can do this exact same composition, use the exact same media, and get a completely different result because there's different ways you can do it every time. But let's just keep this simple, okay? Alright, now the inks that we're going to be using, let's keep our skies blue, water blue, we'll put a little bit of gray maybe into the rocks or something like that in the mountain, okay? Maybe some browns, okay? Kind of earthy tones, alright? So, I have a range of blue tones like this, like light, medium, and dark, alright? If you have a range of tones, what we can get is a range of, we can get more variation with that, okay? If you don't have these exact brand or this range here, don't worry about it. I'll show you what to do on that, okay? But dye-based inks, okay? I wouldn't mix and match with something like 2, you know, blue tones in dye and 1 pigment ink. That's a different technique, okay, that you'd be doing there. Alright, so I'm just going to use the Memento. Mementos are available out there. I use a lot of Marvy pads and whatnot, but for the sake of this stamp along, let's just stick with some different colors that I know are readily available out there still. But substitute anything that you have close to these. Here's a desert sand here. Oh, let's throw in, you know, a distress ink or two. These nice brown tones are good ones to use here. Alright? And then, I don't know, this right here is going to be, leave us, I don't know, with a situation where I think we're going to need a little bit more color, so we'll figure that out when we get to it, okay? But let's start off with our foundation here, okay? Let's look at the scene, and here's what I'm going to do. I like variation in my different imagery in different areas, okay? So I'll show you what we're going to do when we get to it, but just in general, we'll have some areas of this object. We'll keep some areas light and dark of that. The Lakeside Cove, we'll keep some areas light and dark of that. The water, we'll keep some areas light and dark. And this ledge down here will be light and dark. And again, in the sky, okay? Now by having some variations in value in each one of these areas right here, and objects, will look like we really know what we're doing, okay? Alright, in a very easy fashion. Okay, now I'm going to be applying my inks with a Colorbox stylus tool. These are little sponge tips like this. If you don't have these ones and you have some sort of applicator, other applicators, you can try that. Cosmetic sponges, etc. Alright? Now, let's start off. You can start off with any of these objects or any of these areas, okay? But I'm just going to start off with my sky and water. Those are going to be predominantly blue. And we'll bring some of these blues into these other objects just to create a little bit of continuity between them, all of them, okay? So I'm going to start off with my lightest blue. Alright, now if you have other light blues, go ahead and use those ones too. Or in place of, or whatever. Alright, so getting a good saturation of this. Okay, now remember I'm using just some matte paper here. It's not gloss, but you can certainly, if you're doing it on glossy, there'll be a little bit of a different feel to it. I'm going to start tapping in now. On matte paper it tends to grab my ink a little bit more. I don't know if I I didn't think this was yeah, I have some black on this. Let me clean this tip off right here. Here's how I clean my tips. Little clean tip for the tips. right here, okay? I'm just going to take this and I'm going to wet my paper towel and just work it into it like so. Okay. There wasn't too much black ink on there. This tip is stained right here with some black ink that I've used, but if you clean it off and it's not leaching out any black ink on here, then it's clean and it's ready to go. Alright, let's go back to this. I'm a little smudgy there from that black ink, but it should be fine. Okay, use a very light touch here when applying this. Dab around. Now, what we don't want to get is a bunch of, in this case it's a leaf shape, I think, but most of my tips are oval shapes. You don't want to get these shapes everywhere, okay? Like that. So what I'm doing is I'm using a much lighter touch, okay? And I'm condensing my taps, okay? That's the way you do it, right here. So I'm working a small area. I'm not doing this everywhere and jumping around so much. Kind of work a small area so that you can add enough taps down, okay? Think about it like adding like a powdery touch of ink to your surface here. And it grabs the ink pretty fast in terms of the matte paper, okay? Because it's not, now this is not even coated matte paper, okay? So all papers are going to be a little bit different. Okay, now notice I'm not using my mask of my mountain at this point in time. I'm going to be just filling up this entire area. Normally I'd leave an area that's a little bit lighter up there. But see, I am coming down into my mountain a little bit. But we'll use our masks coming up. Okay, now one of the things I like to do is I like to add a lot of ink on my perimeters. Okay, because it's going to get darker out there with more ink used. You're achieving the full saturation of a given color by using a full amount of it in a given space, okay? So it's getting darker kind of nice and gradually. Notice how I'm kind of turning my card like this, and I'm just using a very light tapping, okay? Otherwise your arm's going to get sore, okay? If you kind of use too much pressure, you know, I'm just very light with my stylus tool here too. It's just going like this, okay? It's a lot of repetitive motion, but keep your hands in their nice ergonomic position, okay? And just use a light tapping motion. Where people tend to get kind of undesired marks, let's call them, is when they try to go too fast, okay? They're using too much pressure, okay? And it's not kind of in a nice ergonomic fashion. Alright? And believe me, it's much faster just to kind of get what you want initially rather than to kind of hurry it and get something you don't want. Then you have to kind of blend it out or something like that. But even if you do, that being said, you know, you can always repair your scenes. No problem. You know, you just add more ink usually and whatnot. Okay, now see, I'm kind of taking my area of blue and taking it down. I'm adding in this blue. We might not add all this blue in everywhere, okay? But now here's the thing that will make you look really good, okay? Seeing these rocks down here, I'm adding in some tone, but on the top sides of them, the foreground and background of that image, I'm going to leave some areas of white, okay? And I leave the top sides of it kind of white. Or at least lighter. You know, maybe you don't use as much blue ink on top of them, okay? But now here I come. I'm going into the water. And I will leave some areas of the water a little bit lighter, okay? Now, even for me, doing this scene right here, I don't, you know, I've done mostly matte cardstock. I mean, glossy cardstock before. So even for me, getting this kind of feel up here, it's, you know, I kind of have to keep, you know, going over it and getting the feel of it as well. Okay. So this is like you know, this is like stamp along Stampscaping 101 for me too. Just in terms of the amount of cards that I've done on matte before. Alright, so we have this area going right here. A little bit light up in that area of the mountain. I'll put a little bit of tone up there. Okay, not too much. Alright, let's keep this going here. Now here's what I've done here. See around these little characters right here? I've kept this area kind of light. Maybe I'll put a little bit of shade at the base of their boat, you know? A little bit of shadow. Right, let's do this on the rock as well here. Keep a little area of it light, but for the most part, on the left and right side, had a decent amount of ink on those areas. That'll kind of frame off our scenes really nicely. Okay, so that variation is the thing that's going to create this idea of lighting, okay, within a scene. Your idea of lighting is just simply not coloring everything out with tone, okay? I mean, there's such thing as having very dim lighting, you know, where, you know, there isn't any white left. But what you want is some variation, okay? Alright, that is our blue. Now don't worry about it now. The lightest color is going to get the most amount of coverage, okay? You're not going to have to put down that amount of ink with every pad that you use, or every color that you use. Okay, putting this right up in the sky like so. Alright, now let's move to the next color. Alright, Bahama Blue. Now, one of the things that we can do on here is if we want to make the sky, and we, you know, a little bit separate from the mountain, one of the things that we can do is we can use one of our masks if we want to. Like about like so, okay? And you would just cover this up like that. And you can save these masks for future scenes that you do with that image as well, okay? So I can lay that down like that, and every time you change inks now, especially going darker, one of the things you have to be careful about is not getting these pear shapes everywhere, okay? The darker you go, the more chance you'll have of getting them. So you have to kind of condense your tap. I got a kind of a mark right there, so I'm blending it out, because I went too hard, okay? Immediately. Now this is much easier on glossy cardstock, at least in this technique right here. But this is easy enough, but you just have to condense your taps. Kind of creating that little vignette, adding that tone out there. Now there's other things called like stipple brushes and stuff like that that you can add your inks on like that too. And then you won't have to worry about, you know, these types of shapes right here. But just as long as you use enough ink, you won't have to worry about it here either. And you can vary this too. You can have some, you know, more ink in some areas than others.